Hello everyone, I hope you all are well and making progress in life. Here is Priyanshu and welcome to the Infinity Mind. So, this is the first question of SDE sheet, set matrix zeros. The question says given an m cross n integer matrix, if an element is 0, set its entire row and column to 0. You must do it in place. So, the example one says that if we find any 0 here, it is second row and second column. Okay, so we will mark entire second column and second row as 0 as you see in the result. So we have to do this operation. Okay, so we are given an input matrix and we have to do it in place. So it means we don't have to create another matrix, we have to just modify the original matrix. So first approach which comes into my mind is extreme brute force. That is, we create another matrix and do whatever the question is asking. That if we find a 0, we uh, go to that entire row and entire column and mark it as 0 in our resultant matrix. But in the question it is given that you must do it in place, so we are not allowed to create another matrix. So the second better approach which can come into my mind, that we can just create marker arrays. Okay, what we can do, we can just create two marker arrays. Let's say one is this and one is this. Two marker arrays, one for the row and one for the column. So if we find any 0, like in this we find 0, we will mark that corresponding column array to 0 and mark that corresponding row array to 0. Okay, so after marking it, and now we will again traverse whole array, and we will check, standing at a cell, we will check if its corresponding row corresponding row in the row marker array is marked as 0, we will update that cell to 0. And or if in the column marker array it is 0, we will update the cell as 0. Suppose we are here, we will check if it is 0 or it is 0. If the column corresponding column in the column marker array is 0, or the corresponding row in the row marker array is 0, we will update the cell as 0. So this will be updated as 0. So this will be okay. So the main concept of this question, the main logic will be that we can create two marker arrays. So this, what will be the time complexity? It will create an extra space O of m plus n, that is size of the column and size of the row. But we can see in the follow up, it has asked that could you devise a constant space solution. It means we have to do this question without creating any extra array or anything. So we have to do it in O of 1, and we just have to update the original matrix. Okay, so what we were doing earlier, we were just creating an marker array. We were creating two marker arrays, one column and one row, one for the columns, one for the rows. Okay, so what if we consider our first row and first column as our marker arrays? Okay, we can do this, but the problem is the first cell. We can see the first cell is overlapping. So the solution for this is that for the first cell we can create a variable, a simple variable. We can consider this for the column. We can name it as column 0, and now we will see that we don't have to uh, we will not deal with that overlapping problem now. Let's say we mark it as we will consider this as the column marker, I mean the row marker, because if we find any 0 in this row, we will mark the entire row elements to 0. And for the column, for checking the column, we will consider this. Okay, so this will be our markers. Okay, so if I tell you in detail about the logic that we are using marker arrays and marker row array and marker column array inside the same matrix, and if we find 0, uh, if we find, suppose we are standing at any element, let's say here. Okay, now we will check its first we are standing here. Now we will check the very first above element and the first most left element, and if any one will be 0, we will convert this 1 to 0. Okay, so this was the concept. Now, so what will be our approach now and how we will do this? We will just iterate the whole array, and if we find any 0, we will first mark the first column or the first row to 0. Okay, suppose if we go there, here we are standing at 0 in the first traversal of the matrix. If we find it as 0, we will go and mark here 0 and here as 0. Okay, in our marker arrays. Okay, our marker arrays are inside the matrix only. Okay, these are the first column and first rows. Okay, now after doing this, we will just traverse the array again, the second traversal of the matrix. We will check if any elements corresponding first row and corresponding first column is 0, we will update it as 0. Suppose we go here and we check, is it 0? No. Is it 0? Yes. If anyone is 0, we will update it as 0. So this way our whole matrix will be updated and our question will be solved in O of 1 space. And yes, we are creating this variable because for marking the rows we have considered the first column, and for marking the columns we have considered this first row, but so that it doesn't overlap, we have defined the first cell as column 0. We will mark we will update it uh, if the very first cell is 0, we will update it as 0, and after the in the second traversal for the first column, for the column 0th, it is 0 based indexing. So for the first column, that is 0th column, if we will check this column 0, if it is 0, we will mark the entire column to 0. Okay, let's go to the implementation part. This was my approach. So first of all, let's define the size of the matrix. It is m cross n, so m will be the matrix size of the matrix, and n will be the column size. So column size is this. Now we will create that first variable, and now we will go for our first traversal. Okay, this column 0 variable will be matrix of 0 and 0, because if it is 0, first cell is 0, we'll mark it as 0. If it is 1, we will mark it as 1. Okay, simple. Now we will iterate our first iteration, and okay, now if we find any 0, if the element is 0, if the element is 0, we will go and say that mark its first row and first column to 0, corresponding first row and first column to 0. So suppose we find a 0 here, this, okay. So what we will do, we will just go and mark 0 in our first cell, okay. So this is the this is our row. We have to mark the row and column, first row and first column of that corresponding element to 0. So for marking in the row we don't have any problem because we have considered the entire column as our marker rows. So we will just update it as 0. But for marking the column we have to be aware that if it is the very first column or the 0th column, so we don't have to mark in the first cell, we have to mark in that column 0 variable. So we will check this case, that if j is equals to 0, we have to mark column 0 as 0, else we have to mark in the matrix only. We'll mark 0 of j to 0, okay. Now our first traversal is completed. Now in the second traversal, what we have to do, now it's time to modify the matrix. So suppose if we start from the first element, okay, and now our uh, first row and first column is ready, and we will if we find any element in the element we find corresponding first row and corresponding first column to be 0, we will mark the element as 0. But what if we start from 0, what if we start from the cell 1 and go to the bottom right cell? Suppose if we find any 0 in the starting, and when we go to the end, suppose we find a 0 in the starting, let's say hypothetically we mark it as 0, and when we will go to the end, that is the bottom right cell, suppose it is also 0. So if we go to the bottom right cell, it will be forcefully marked as 0, okay, because we are making changes in our marker arrays, okay. So we don't want it. So what we will do, let me change the color. We will first iterate here so that we cannot touch the marker arrays, okay, because we are dependent on it, and if we make changes in that first, then whole array can be marked incorrectly. So we will iterate in the inner matrix only first, okay. So first iterate in the inner matrix. So we will start from I is equals to 1, indexing is 0 based. Simply if we find the first column or the first array to be 0, we will mark that cell as 0, okay. Now it's time for updating our marker arrays, that is the first uh, column and the first row. So what do you think, what should we mark first, the first column or the first row? Suppose we mark the first column first, okay. So let's say we marked it as 0 here, okay, after checking the column 0 variable and its own uh, element, we mark it as 0. Now if we go here, don't you think that this will mark forcefully as 0, because here we have 0? So that is why for mark marking it correctly, we should first mark this one, our first row. We should mark our first row and then go for marking the first column. Okay, this will update our array correctly. So for marking the first row, what we have to do, we have to check that if the element itself is 0 or the first row is 0, that corresponding row, corresponding first, that leftmost element is 0. So there is no need to check if it is 0 or not, because if it is 0 we don't need to change it to 0. We will just check if the first leftmost element is 0. Okay, so we will mark the entire row to 0. Okay, so this was a column size is n, so we will go and mark the entire row to 0. So the cell will be 0, j. Okay, so now we have updated our first row. Now we will go and update our first column. So for first column we have our variable column 0. If we find that column 0 is 0, we'll mark the entire column to 0. So mark entire column to 0, traversing from the first row to the last row and marking the first column, marking the entire first column to 0. So this is now marked. Now the question is completed, and I hope this array will be, this matrix will be updated correctly. Let's run the sample test cases. Okay, it is accepted. Now let's submit it and check whether we are able to pass all the test cases or not. Okay, so now we have completed this solution. So if I tell you what we have learned from this set matrix zeros, that suppose if we are required to update something in the matrix, and we have to use marker arrays. So instead of creating another marker arrays which will create an extra space complexity, we can just use our first column and first row as our markers. So this was the logic, and this was the intuition also. So if I talk about the time and space complexity, we can see that this for loop is taking m cross n, and this again for loop is taking m, and this is taking n. Okay, so our first for loop is taking m cross n, our second is also taking m cross n in the worst case, and this is taking only n, and this is taking m. So overall we can say that our time complexity is big O of m cross n. Okay, and we are not using any extra space, we are just using this column 0 variable. We can say that the space complexity is big O of 1. Okay, so that's all for this problem. I hope you understood, and thanks for watching. Till then, keep learning, keep upgrading every day. See you in the next video.